This is Second Act Sessions with Stephanie Carmody, a podcast celebrating second acts in life about embracing change, questioning the status quo, and having conversations that really matter. If I've learned anything, it's that your second act is yours to define. No matter what chapter you're in, your second act can be the most powerful yet. Welcome to Second Act Sessions. All right, so welcome back, everyone. I'm so excited to have my next guest join us, Dave Roberts. He is, I kind of want to say like a jack of all trades because you've been through so much. You are a retired addiction professional, professor, podcast host, and author, primarily because your life was certainly changed and impacted through the death of your daughter. We will certainly unpack that and get into that, but I think your story is remarkable because similar to myself and others, you had the journey of dealing with grief, and then how did you turn that loss and your grief into something positive? And I know that you're doing that through your podcast now and through your book. So I'd love to, first of all, welcome you, Dave. I'm so thrilled to have you here. So thank you so much for joining me.
Stephanie, thank you for inviting me. I've been looking forward to our conversation since we connected.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'm looking forward to being on your podcast as well. And I know when we initially spoke over the phone, like a month ago or so, and we talked about grief, and I was connected through a colleague or friend of mine, Tony Lynch, and he connected me with a lot of people that he had been working with. And it's certainly on the topic of grief and grieving loss or death or what have you. And I just want to say that I know all of us have struggled with grief at one point or another. It could be through a death, it could be through a divorce, it could be through so many things. I think, but grief is the same, and it's all how we navigate that, and how do we come from that, get out of that grief and process it, but then how do we, like I always say, pay it forward, so to speak, and how do we give back, or how do we share, how we navigated our grief journey. And I think, your story, your testimony is truly remarkable, and I just would love to, I guess maybe we can start with, unfortunately, the death of your daughter, if you wouldn't mind taking us through that, and then what that looked like for you as you were navigating that grief and that loss.
Yes, I experienced every parent's worst nightmare. I mean, as parents, I never thought I'd be existing and live long enough to bury one of my children. Usually it's up to our children to carry the legacy of their parents.
Yes. When
we're gone. And now I found myself at the age of 47 carrying my daughter's legacy. Mm-hmm. And again, it was something I never anticipated coming into this world to encounter. No, but, as I've learned, and as I've said on my podcast and I've said on other podcasts, is that we have no control over the challenges that befall us in this lifetime. It's how we rise to those challenges. It's how we transcend those that dictate the quality of our lives. But as you mentioned in the beginning, Stephanie, I was employed as an addictions counselor for the state of New York. At the time that my daughter got sick, I was working as an addictions counselor and a clinical supervisor for a state-run inpatient agency. And her journey started actually in September of 2001 when she informed me with her significant other that she was pregnant. She was expecting a child. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, a father particularly might blow a gasket when they find out that their daughter is pregnant out of wedlock or before they got married, or just an untimely pregnancy. Right. And unfortunately, and I'm glad this happened this way, I did not get upset. I really had a lot of respect and love for her significant other. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to make sure that they had a plan. So we talked out everything. I was convinced that they had a plan. He was going to take good care of her. And the only thing she did ask me, she goes, "Would you mind telling Mom?" And I said, "No, I'm going to leave that one to you," because I suspected that initially my wife might respond a little differently, and she did. But eventually she came around.
Right, of course.
On May 2nd, 2002, Jeannine's daughter, Brianna, was born. Happy, healthy baby. Brianna's now 23 years old. And she has 2 children of her own, so now I can add great-grandfather to my category.
Oh, well, congratulations.
Well, thank you. But what happened is during her pregnancy, Stephanie, Jeannine injured her foot in a freak accident. And her foot swelled, did not respond to traditional treatments for a swollen foot, didn't respond to a walking boot, rest, elevation. Finally, in April of 2002, her podiatrist wanted to do an MRI to see what was going on. Mm-hmm. Jeannine opted not to have it done until after Brianna was born. So they did an MRI. found an undefined 8-centimeter mass in the bottom of her foot. They did a biopsy. They found it highly suggestive for a rare and aggressive form of sarcoma called alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma.
Is that normal? You never hear of anything like that in your foot. Is that like a rare occurrence?
Yeah, the type of sarcoma that she had was rare. Sarcomas at that time, Stephanie, accounted for only 2,500 of the newly diagnosed cancers per year. That was like 3 to 4%. So sarcomas were rare. So something that our area in upstate New York had not seen, was not equipped to deal with. So her oncologist here in Utica, New York, referred us to the Dana-Farber Hospital and Research Hospital in Boston, which is one of the best hospitals in the country for pediatric sarcoma research and treatment. They got the results. They took a look at her PET scans, all of her tests. They came back in a 5-minute consult, and they said, your daughter has a stage 4 tumor with bone marrow and lymph node involvement. There is no cure for her cancer. The only chance that we have is to put her cancer in remission through aggressive chemotherapy until we could find a cure. Now, this was in June of 2002. Now, prior to that, I'm going to just backtrack and give you a couple of dates. May 2nd, my granddaughter's born. May 19th, I culminated a 25-year journey in higher education by getting word from SUNY Albany that I received my master's in social work degree.
Okay.
May 26th, my daughter is diagnosed with cancer. June 2nd, that diagnosis is confirmed with a poorer than poor prognosis. Because what I heard, what my daughter heard, and I saw the tears coming down her face, is that unless there's a miracle, your daughter's going to die.
How old was she at this point?
She was 18.
18, okay.
And I did the research on a very reputable rhabdomyosarcoma site. She had all the mortality indicators: tumor size, stage 4. She had a childhood cancer at the age of 18. She had contracted this cancer or gotten this cancer prior to the age of 10, she might have had a better prognosis for a longer quality of life.
Got it. So they think she had it for. Did they think that she had this sarcoma for a while, or
no?
They don't know. Wow.
What they surmised happened, and they couldn't really pinpoint a cause for her cancer. What they suspected is that when she injured her foot, it activated some previously dormant cancer cells.
Yes.
And obviously, being pregnant,
pregnant can really change a lot of things in your body, for sure.
Hormonally,
Yes.
and also masked any type of differential diagnosis that they could have done, because sarcomas needed to be tracked and diagnosed early if there was going to be any chance for quality of life. But to make a longer story short, she went through 6 rounds of aggressive chemotherapy, which only put her cancer in 80% remission. And with cancer, it's either 100% or bust.
Right.
And the 20% that she had, there was a news site that had surfaced where the cancer was starting to grow. Shortly after the holidays in 2002, her cancer remetastasized. We were given a 1 to 3 month prognosis on February 19, 2003, and I remember this date clearly. She said, "I'm not going to do treatment anymore." The treatment was actually too painful for her to undergo.
It's brutal.
And she just said, "I don't want to do this anymore."
Yeah.
So we called in hospice, and hospice provided support to our family, during the end stage of Jeannine's life, and for the year afterwards. But they were there, and I was there on March 1st, 2003, and I held my daughter's hand as she took her last breath at 12:30 in the morning. And at the age of 47, I was faced with trying to determine what type of a person I was going to be, the type of world I was going to live in, what my world was going to look like. Right. Everything that I had believed in, all of my priorities, all of my values, everything was up for discussion. Because
was that your only child, or did you have other children?
She was my only daughter.
She
was the middle child of. I have an older son, Dan, and I have a younger son, Matt, and they're both doing very well. They're great young men. They are married and they have children of their own.
Okay. Great.
So, but she was my only daughter, and the father
Oh,
daughter bond was
I'm
was
sure.
really tight, and
Yeah.
um, yeah, I was devastated. I was
Oh,
devastated
rightfully
when she
so.
died.
I can only imagine. So, I mean, I can only, you're, like you said earlier, your parents are not supposed to bury their children. It's supposed to be
Hmm.
the other way around. So, I mean, anything like that is just so traumatic. And I'm so sorry for your loss, obviously. What were those beginning, as you mentioned, like my whole world just turned upside down. What were those first few days, weeks, months after her death? What did that look like for you?
It was, I'm going to take a quote, and I'm paraphrasing this from a book by Tom Crider, who lost
Hmm.
his daughter
Hmm.
in an apartment fire,
Hmm.
and he said it was like, early grief for him was akin to kind of rummaging through a box of sweaters to try to find one that fit. And for
Mm.
me, it was like I was felt totally disconnected from myself,
Hmm.
from the world around me.
Hmm.
It was like, I would see people having fun, enjoying themselves, being with their intact families, and wondered, what the heck happened to me? You know,
Right. I'm assuming you had a range of emotions from denial to shock to anger, sadness. I mean, all the feels, I'm
uh-huh.
assuming, like,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, and at that point you're like, did you feel like I have to do something to help others at that point, or that came later on and you were just sort of like, I guess in your grief, you were grieving, right?
Yeah.
So what did you do to help process the grief? Did you see therapists? Did you kind of lean on any of your teachings or anything like that, or?
Well, one of the things is that I had a therapist to begin with because,
Hmm.
ironically, when I was finishing up my master's in social work degree, I was doing my field placement, my
Mm.
second year field placement at a skilled nursing facility. And
Got it.
that brought up some unresolved grief issues, or resurfaced grief issues, as a result of the death of my mentor,
Oh, jeez.
who died of cancer, and also my mother. And
Oh,
so
no.
uh, my field supervisor referred me to a very great psychiatrist who was more focused on doing therapy than he was prescribing meds.
That's
So
good.
I was working with him
Right.
um, prior to Jeannine's illness, and when I told him about Jeannine's illness, he
Hmm.
said, "Well, David, our priorities have changed. Now we have to focus on some the practical issues." So I had a good therapist.
Okay.
He he wrote a letter on my behalf to my employers at work saying that I was in no shape to work, that I
Hmm.
needed to be home with my daughter. So I was able to take 3 months of continuous sick leave because
Okay.
of that. He
That's
also
great.
advocated for modified work duty for me, where I was only going back as a case manager and not worried about the stressors of supervision. And this
Okay.
is while Jeannine was still alive,
Okay.
and she had the chemotherapy was having a relatively positive effect. But both my therapist and I knew that it was just going to be a matter of time before we were looking at me walking a path that I never intended to walk or didn't want to
No.
walk.
Right. Of
But
course not.
but initially, Stephanie, I had to wallow in the muck of my grief before I could wallow through it. I had to feel all the feels.
Yes.
I had to seek support.
Hmm.
My wife Sherry found a very good bereaved parent support group that was sponsored by a local funeral home.
Oh, that's great.
And one of the things is, intellectually, I felt like I was all alone in my grief. And I mean, I could say intellectually, I realized, oh, yeah, I know I'm not alone, but I did feel alone. I
The
just felt,
feeling and thinking are two different things. Because, like,
yeah,
even for me, like, I didn't go through anything quite nearly as
yeah,
traumatic, but you do feel alone, and you're like,
yep,
but I know I'm not alone. I have family and
yeah,
friends, and thousands of people have gone through this. Why am I? It's the weirdest thing. Like, grief just, it messes with your brain, your thought process, everything.
uh-huh,
It just strips you down, right? And
yeah.
it takes a while to kind of wade and navigate through that.
Yeah, brain fog is real. The inability
Yes.
to concentrate is real.
Yes.
The emotional roller coaster is real. The
Hmm.
fatigue of grief is real. I went through all of that.
How
Um,
many years would you say you dealt with all of that? Was it like, could you put a time frame on it? Or, I mean, obviously healing's
um,
not linear. I'm sure you still have moments, but in that beginning, how long was that duration for you?
Probably about 2.5 years with the
Mm.
initial phase, and then
Yeah.
gradually my energy levels began to increase. But it was really
Hmm.
about 2.5 years before physically,
Mm.
and yeah, and emotionally, I kind of felt more like on an even keel,
Yes.
where I felt more that I could cope.
Well, because I think
with
your
this.
mind, body, and spirit are all impacted.
Absolutely.
And you have to heal all three parts of you. And how about your wife, if you don't mind me asking? Was she kind of similar or?
We grieve differently. I mean, men and women traditionally, for the
So different.
are different.
Yes,
We felt just as intensely, but we dealt with it differently. I had to work
Right.
through my emotions. She talked about her emotions. In the beginning, we didn't have energy to deal with our own grief, much less each other's, but we gradually
Right.
found that we were able to hold space for each other, respect how each other grieved,
Right.
and our relationship became stronger in the process.
That's lovely, because some marriages may not have survived that, and you also still had two children you had to still care for.
And I had a granddaughter because
Of course, a baby.
yeah, well, and the other thing is that Jeannine and her significant other and her daughter and her two cats moved in with me, my wife Sherry, my two boys, and the running joke in the neighborhood was how many 2- and 4-leggeds could you get into a single level ranch, and we were able to test that theory.
You managed,
And,
right?
Yeah, and her significant other and our granddaughter Brianna lived with us for 4 years, and he did that as a promise to Jeannine. Until
Oh, wow.
Brianna was ready for kindergarten, he stayed
Okay.
with us.
That's
And
amazing.
he was a young man whose responsibility was well beyond his 19 years. Funny thing is that a couple of times she gave him an out. She said, you don't have to go through this with me. And he looked at her and he said, why? I'm going to go through this with you, because he loved her. And
Oh, it's amazing.
and he was there taking care of her. He stayed right to the end and beyond. And I can't thank him enough. I can't be grateful enough to him. And even though we don't see him as much anymore, the impact that he had on our lives and what he did to help us through our grief journey by staying with us with their daughter, with Jeannine's daughter, and
Yep.
and us continuing to see her when he reestablished himself on his own.
Yeah.
That's another thing, because he always made sure that we saw Jeannine's daughter and his daughter. So
Right, exactly.
but the other thing I think that helped was getting that support initially, talking to other parents who'd been longer on the journey than me, to find out what they did to get to that point.
Yeah.
Because for a year seemed like an eternity from where I was sitting. A day seemed like an eternity. An hour seemed like an eternity from where I was sitting.
Well, and it must have been impacted too that now you weren't working for a while, so then you had more time on your hands to probably sit and think, and obviously to heal. But I'm assuming too you didn't even have much to distract you, maybe in a way.
No. Well, I went back to work. I went back to work during her illness, and in September of that, I think it was September 2002, I went back to work.
Okay.
I did take a little time off for the funeral and for calling hours, but then I went back to work again.
Oh, you did? Okay.
And also I started teaching right in the middle of all of this. I had gotten position offered to me at Utica University, which was then Utica College.
Yep.
And I applied for that during a time in her chemo when she was doing well. Because with my degree, I'd wanted to teach and do private practice, but I threw private practice out the window in the initial stages because I couldn't focus the energy that I needed to do private practice and teach. So I got an opportunity to teach in my alma mater. I took it, and I started teaching in January of 2003, which was 6 weeks before my daughter died, or as I call it, transition to a new existence. But I couldn't get out of the contract, obviously, so she transitioned during the middle of my first semester of my first year teaching of my first class. But the students in the community that I had at Utica College were also a source of support. They lifted me up.
That's great.
When they found out that she had transitioned, they, with their smiles, with saying, Mr. Roberts, Dave, we like what you're doing as a professor. Keep up the good work. The days that I did not have the energy to teach, I drew energy from them, and that got me through the next moment. So the support I had from the Bereaved Parent Support Group, from the Utica University community, allowed me to get through those early phases a step at a time. And then eventually, probably around about 2007, about probably 3.5 years in, I began writing about my journey. I wrote for online publications. I started to do grief workshops in honor of my my daughter to try to find meaning and help others.
Okay, there you go.
But then in 2010, I was doing everything that I needed to do as a bereaved parent. If you looked at the playbook, Stephanie, it's find support, re-engage in life with meaning, honor your daughter's memory, live a purpose-driven life. I was living that, but in 2010, 7 years after, everything kind of jump-started through pure serendipity, where my grief went to another level, where I was able to find peace with my daughter's transition and then understand that survivalness of consciousness is a real thing.
Okay.
So,
wow. I want to talk about that. And you mentioned, obviously, she's transitioned. So I wanted to get into what did your faith look like, and how did that sustain you or get you through it? Or was it, spirituality? I'd love for you to kind of share your journey there, and then how that impacted your grief and your grieving process.
My faith was quite shaken. I was never what you would call a religious person. I was raised Catholic. I did the altar boy routine when I was young. I went to church every day as part of the requirements for going to school. I was educated in Catholic schools right through high school.
Yep.
But then when I was 16 and I could make a decision to explore other avenues other than Catholicism, I did. I made that choice.
Okay.
But my faith was shaken. I questioned why God put our family in this situation, why he chose us. I always, I think, lived life, not covertly stating this, but I kind of figured, if I lived life with integrity, if I didn't cheat on my wife, if I was a good father, good husband, I somehow would be spared from tragedy, which, as I look at it now, I look back and I laugh at that now, because that living a good life is not going to insulate you from tragedy.
Nope.
And
good deeds doesn't equate to no trials or tribulations or any. That's what I've learned, anyways. It's not about that. Unfortunately, we're all going to experience pain and suffering in this lifetime.
If we live long enough, we're going to experience tragedy. However, we define tragedy. But so, my faith was shaken, and ironically, the facilitator of our bereaved parent support group was a nun. She was a Franciscan nun, but she invited all different perspectives. It just wasn't faith-based.
Okay.
So about 2.5 years into my journey, or 2 years, it started. I just was sick of being a bereaved parent. I wanted my life the way it was. I didn't want to do the support thing anymore. I just wanted God to do a do-over, do a makeover, give me my life back. So I withdrew myself from support. I stopped doing what helped me get to work through my grief. At that point, I was utterly miserable. So I went and talked to my bereaved parents facilitator, and I talked to her and I said, "Look, I'm angry because God took my child from me." I just put it right out there. And then she looked at me, didn't even skip a beat. She looked at me, she goes, "What if God was just as upset as you for taking your child?" And then I started to think about that. I said, "Oh, that's a different perspective." I started to think about it. I said, "Yeah, what if he was as upset as me that he took my child?" And there were things that were happening after she died that defied my science background. I was always looked at behavior having to be proven through scientific means. I didn't embrace spirituality. I didn't believe in signs or spirituality or mediums or any of that stuff. But there were things that were happening, like a butterfly would follow me around the block as I was walking my granddaughter, just hovering. I'd be thinking of my daughter and a song that we liked to come on the radio. So I started to question, maybe there's something more, but I could not integrate that into my science-based background. But again, as I mentioned, that all changed in 2010. And but yeah, my faith was shaken, but now my faith is strong again.
That's great.
And
did you pray often? Do you still pray today? Or obviously you believe in God, and sounds like, but you don't, I guess, associate yourself with a religion. Like you wouldn't call yourself Christian or Catholic anymore. I mean, how do you identify? Well,
I'm pretty much interfaith. I kind of go after the lead of one of my favorite authors, Kent Nerburn, who describes himself as a guerrilla spiritualist.
Okay.
So I take a little bit of Catholicism, a little bit of Buddhism, some Native American teachings of animals and nature, nature therapy, and that comprises my ways or methods to connect to something greater than myself. Also, Stephanie, I do incorporate some scripture-based materials or faith-based, but it's not all that I do. I don't go to church, but I do pray, and I do feel connected to a community of individuals that I've gotten to know over the years. So, religion and faith-based means can be used to transcend challenge, self and spirituality, and I just take a little bit of everything. That comprises my belief system. And to anticipate your next question or your audience's questions, I don't reject anybody who's typically faith-based, because it's what we believe is what we believe. It isn't my job to question, it's my job to understand it and understand how that's helped you through your challenges. And in the process of seeking to understand that, I may be able to pick up something from a faith-based perspective that I can add to my own belief system. That can help me create greater awareness about myself and my relationship to the world around me.
Right. I also think everyone's on their own journey. I mean, so for me, I'm a born again Christian and my faith is very important to me, but it's not to say I haven't strayed from Jesus. I even got for me, I feel like I got stuck in New Age spirituality, and I think I mentioned that to you before. But again, that's my journey. It's what I believe, and I'm not saying anyone has to believe exactly what I believe, I just think everyone's on their own journey. And even when I was stuck in that, I know my friend kind of got pulled out of it, and she was getting closer to God. And I could sense that we were not drifting apart, but that she was holding space for me, knowing that even that's where I was, and she accepted that, even if she disagreed with it. And so that's kind of my belief now. Like, I have my beliefs, and I wouldn't judge anyone for their beliefs. I think everyone's on their own path, their own journey, and what works for them is great. And at the end of the day, I think whatever you're meant to do or be or become, that will happen regardless. God will get you, so to speak, right? To whatever extent, possible.
Absolutely. And what you believe is, it's important for me to understand how that's helped you get to this point. Not only for my own learning, but just out of respect.
Yeah, exactly.
And the other thing is where I would take exception, and I think anybody would take exception, is if you're telling me that, if I was telling you that how I believe is how you have to believe, then I would expect you would shut me down.
Yes.
Because now there's more than one way to awareness. There's more than one path to awareness. And as long as what we're doing is not hurting ourselves, is not hurting anybody else, who's to say that that isn't the right path for us? It's our path. We choose to see the world through our own eyes, and we do what is best for us. And I think as a society, we need to respect those beliefs.
I agree, and I think we can't force people to believe what we want to believe. And I think throwing religion down someone's throat has the adverse effect. Do you know what I'm saying? I think just by being you and sharing your story and sharing your testimony, like, that's inspiring to someone. And maybe that would inspire someone to be like, oh, you know what, maybe I should pick up a Bible, or maybe I should consider this. And that's what I think you can do it in different ways without preaching. I'm not a preacher. You're not a preacher. Let the preachers do their job and the pastors do their job and whatnot. But I'm not a biblical scholar. I'm not an expert in all things. And I think we just have to hold space for people to find things out in their own time and their own journey. And we can always pray for them, right? We don't have to preach to them. We can pray for them. That's how I sort of kind of my view is on faith in general. And
And prayer comes in different forms. There's intentional prayer, there's intercessional prayer, there's prayer through scripture. So, we can pray in a lot of different ways. Meditation's a form of prayer. So, however people choose to pray, however people choose to honor their higher power, who am I to say whether it's right or wrong, Stephanie?
Right. And everyone's had different experiences. Like, what you went through pales in comparison to what I went through. So who am I to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing? Like, I just think you're on your own journey, and that's, you have to respect others. I wanted to then talk about, as you started then transitioning into helping others process grief and all of that, what did that look like? What was one of the first things that you did? Because I know your background is, obviously background in psychology and addiction and all that. Did you kind of marry that together, or did you realize I need to do something totally different and this is my new path, and sort of in a way your second act, right? Like, this is your next chapter. obviously you didn't choose for it, but you have to make the best of it, obviously. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, interestingly, when I went back to work and I was doing direct practice, and even when I started doing clinical supervisor duties again, I had therapists, direct practice therapists where I work refer individuals to me specifically for grief counseling.
Okay.
And so I was able to marry, I guess, the techniques that I learned in addiction counseling with grief counseling. And with addiction, there's what I call a lot of delayed grief, a lot of disenfranchised grief. Delayed grief because typically with individuals who are addicted, who experience loss, any type of loss is a stressor. And that can be an automatic relapse trigger for them to begin to self-medicate to dull the pain. So I would deal with referrals with that nature, talk about how they could deal with grief in a healthy way, make that part of their relapse prevention plan so that they're not reverting to a drug-free lifestyle again.
Right.
And, the other thing with, delayed grief, it's like, if they've been self-medicating 3 or 4 years after a loss, and this happened with one client that I was working with. When they come into treatment and they start to get sober, they begin to experience that loss 4 years ago as if it's day one, because
all over again.
Right. And they're started from the beginning because they didn't allow themselves to grieve 4 years ago because of the self-medication. So those were the things that I dealt with. Plus the other thing that is disenfranchised is because of the stigma associated with addicts, with addiction. I would ask them, how many of you lost a fellow friend who was addicted as a result of addiction and never had a chance to express your grief over that loss? And then when I was doing a general lecture on grief, I get a lot of hands raised. So grief was unresolved grief. Disenfranchised grief was what I discovered was one of the biggest relapse triggers, or bigger relapse triggers for them.
Wow.
And maybe I began to notice that more because of my own journey, because I hadn't noticed that in the beginning. But as I began to work more with that, I began to realize, hey, this may be as big of a relapse trigger as a loss of a job, returning to people, places, and things. So I tried to impart a lot of what I learned along the way to them, as far as to give them tools to deal with that. So I think my clinical background helped in terms of working with individuals who were grieving. Certainly my clinical background didn't help with my own experience. I mean, all the credentials that I had.
That was going to be my next question. Like, couldn't you have just applied some of your techniques or tips or whatever you tell your clients and not for yourself, right?
No, all the training, all the background, all the experience I had working with clients who had their trauma due to addiction or just had addiction issues in general, didn't even begin to help me address my own issues. Because there's no textbook that I have found or no playbook that says, here's how you deal with the death of a child as a parent, or for a sibling, here's how you deal with the death of a brother or sister. It's something that through support, through a willingness to embrace different perspectives and build a different foundation post-loss than I had pre-loss, to help me accept living in a world where my daughter wasn't physically present, but present in different ways. It took a lot of work, and none of the training I had was even began to help me deal with that. I couldn't just say, okay, let me apply this as a bonus chip. I've had 22 years of therapy. Let me just transfer this over here. My grief will not magically go away, but it'll accelerate the process. And I had to learn all of this on my own, and also through a lot of support, and through again, particularly one experience that I had that just really shifted my whole perspective and everything for me. Caused me to look at life, death, and life after death a lot differently.
Right. So can we talk about grief itself? Like, how would you define grief? And then what would you recommend to people who've gone through what you've gone through or what I've gone through? Like, what do you tell them about grief? Because I think we know the word grief and okay, we understand it, but it hits different when you're in it. So for me, example, I think when my ex left in the first year before we were officially divorced, I remember I was in it, probably similar to you, but obviously different. I was just in a state of shock and denial and almost just kind of going through the motions. And then I feel like after that, when I really kind of did the work and started going inward, all the other feelings came up: bitterness, anger, resentment. And then I realized I didn't properly grieve the loss and death of the marriage. And I found like 2 years later myself in Italy sitting by the pool, bawling my eyes out. And I look back and like the entire year of 2024, I just cried. I cried and I cried and I cried. And I know that's a form of grief, and I was releasing, and I know all of that's very healing. But from coming from you, who is obviously an expert in grief, and this is what you do now and you help others, share a little bit about grief in and of itself, like if you wouldn't mind, because I feel like that is interesting. I haven't really talked to anyone about that yet.
Well, grief, if you look at grief defined, you mentioned it affects mind, body, and spirit. It's a physical, it's a psychological, a cognitive, the emotional changes that occur as a result of loss. And, you're looking at, these are normative, and this is a process that regardless, it starts all over again with every loss. Okay, it doesn't matter, like it's been almost over 22 years since the transition of my daughter. I have come to a place of acceptance, not closure, but acceptance that that her physical, she's not, her physical presence is no longer viable. But I also have accepted living in a world without her, and living in that world with purpose and with meaning.
Right.
But
do you think with acceptance comes a little bit or form of peace? Because I feel like once you accept it for me anyways, like I felt a little bit more peaceful because I made peace with it by accepting it. So because for me, it's all about peace, love, and purpose. And I feel like those are very similar themes to you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But basically with acceptance comes a sense of peace. It doesn't mean you stop grieving, because grief is a lifelong thing. Any event that comes up that reminds me, boy, I wish my daughter was here, I wish my mother was here, I wish that always is going to reinvent the grief again. It's also going to bring some sadness and yearning and longing. Yeah. But 23 years later, I look at that in some ways now as a gift, because it's another way that I can remember my love for her. And it's also every negative moment that I have now with grief teaches me something. I can learn from that, and learn that, life isn't always going to be a bowl of cherries. It isn't all about happiness. It's experiencing the moments that aren't so happy. Right. It's looking at those and trying to see the gifts in emotions that aren't happy. To take a look at, maybe that's another way that we can remember our loved one. Maybe it's another way of saying, hey, look, I love you, because I want you to remember what we had. And so the other thing with grief, it's not always pretty, but it demands to be felt. The process demands to be gone through. There's normative things that occur during grief. I think we talked about some of those earlier, like brain fog, lack of concentration, physical fatigue beyond physical fatigue, compromised immune system due to stress. The chances for heart attack also increase within the first 72 hours for those that are surviving.
Wow, I did not know that.
And or stroke or anything like that. That's why a lot of times you may see, like husband and wife, wife will pass away or husband will pass away, and then the wife goes after that. Some of it have called it broken heart syndrome.
Yes,
but a lot of
grief.
But a lot of that also may be physical changes that occur that make us susceptible to cardiovascular events or stroke because of the stress of really grief.
Well, I think if you're stressed because of the grief and everything, it impacts your immune system, and your body is weakened, of course. It's all connected.
Absolutely.
That makes sense. Wow.
Yeah, especially with ongoing fatigue that compromises immune system, makes you more susceptible to, to illness and sickness. And then the other stuff, just a total disconnect from the world around you, a disconnect from yourself, a change in relationship with yourself and others, the people who were in your circle when you were grieving, or before you were grieving, before that loss, may be nowhere to be found. And there may be other people that take their place. So what grief is about is about change. It's about change, and it's about the impact that it has on all parts of our psyche and our mind and our body.
Right. I also think too, for me, I think time really does help. I mean, it doesn't erase anything, and you still have to process and deal with it. Obviously, it's totally different with the loss of a child. I can't make any comparisons in my life, but even with time, I feel like it's every day you feel a little bit better, maybe a little bit stronger, or today was a little bit better than yesterday. And, we'll all have waves where something will trigger you, right? And then you could be crying one minute later. But I feel like the passing of time in a way does help.
Yeah, and it does, because the passing of time helps us, because the more time passes, we get more support. We embrace other maybe schools of thought that give us some different perspectives, allow us to find acceptance and peace. Yeah. We now also become kind of grief mentors to those who are early in the process. That always inspires me when somebody trusts me with their story of their most intimate tragedy of their lives. And here's the other thing, and I tell individuals this: just because the worst loss for me was my child doesn't mean I can't meet you at your worst loss.
Right.
I can tap into the pain of my worst loss and try to empathize with the pain of your worst loss, because the pain of everybody's worst loss is universal. It's life altering. It's pain. It's life altering.
It's pain. Exactly. It's loss. Exactly.
Yeah. So I would never try to have somebody say, well, geez, I feel really weird talking to you because you lost a child, I lost a spouse, or I lost a pet, or I lost a grandparent. Look, your worst tragedy doesn't have to be mine. But I can go to where your worst tragedy is, because I know what the pain of mine was like. So I tell
you
them
can have empathy for that person and hold space for them, which is beautiful.
And that's one of the things that I've learned with the challenges of the challenges I've experienced with Jeannine's transition, is that, and this is one of I call it the gift of sadness. The gift of sadness can make us, our own sadness, if we tap into that and we allow it to feel that sadness, can lead to the most compassionate human beings you'll ever find. Sadness can morph into compassion for others. And also, compassion is a big part, natural compassion is a big part of what we do with service. As we show that compassion to others, and empathy follows, and that's important when you're dealing with individuals who are dealing with life-altering tragedy.
Of course. So now, you mentioned your books. You wrote a book called When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. Yep. So I'd love for you to tell me about that, how that came about, and a little bit about that. Oh, I love the cover.
Yeah, I'll do it. Show it again. Yep.
Awesome.
There you go.
Love it. So fill me in on that journey. What did that look like? And tell me about that process.
Well, let's see. I'm going to try to give you the abridged version, because because if I gave you the long version, you'd be getting a couple of Snickers bars for nourishment, because we'd be here for a while. So
oh no.
So
we'll keep it short for our listeners.
All right, we'll keep it short. It's in August 25th of 2010. I received a phone call from an interfaith minister by the name of Patty Furino, who was living in Long Island. She was working as a volunteer for the Angel of Hope, which is a statue that's erected in places all over the country to honor children who have transitioned, died, or passed on, however individuals choose to conceive death. So Patty was working with the parents in that Angel of Hope. So she wanted to register for a grief conference that I was helping to organize. So everything was online. So she put in all of her choices, workshop choices, double-checked her information, double-checked her credit card information, hit submit, her computer screen went totally black.
Oh, jeez.
So we look at it as kind of now divine intervention, because if her computer screen had not gone blank, she would not have had to call me to register for the conference.
Yep, I believe. There's no such thing as a coincidence, by the way.
No, coincidence is out of my vocabulary a long time ago, and
good.
I think particularly since I met Patty, it's serendipity and synchronicity. So we talked for about 45 minutes. I shared about Jeannine with her. I asked her if she had lost a child, but she said no. But she said there were two children that she worked with through the Angel of Hope that really had stolen her heart, and that she had considered, obviously, to be part of her family, and she was very connected to.
Right.
So, and she asked me, do you believe in signs? And I said, Patty, I really don't go in for that kind of thing. And as I mentioned earlier, there were things that were happening that I began to question but couldn't quite make sense of.
Right, and you probably felt that was a little too woo-woo for you at that point, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. It was too woo-woo and too, like, out there for me to even consider. But I said, I think my daughter sent me a double rainbow on Father's Day in 2009, and she did. I believe she did because my wife called me and said, I think your daughter sent you a double rainbow. And it hadn't rained. There was not a cloud in the sky, but there was this big double rainbow. So she said, she told me, I told her, if I see you at the conference, I'm going to give you a great big hug. And that's what I did. I saw her, gave her a hug.
Yep.
And then she whispered in my ear, I think your daughter sent me a rainbow. Now, Stephanie, at the end of the conference, I am tired.
Right.
And I just said, oh, that's great. And I just kind of like poo-pooed it.
Yeah.
But it turns out September 3rd, the week before she came down for the conference, and the weekend of her husband and hers anniversary, on Route 17 in New Jersey, there was this big double rainbow in the sky. They hadn't rained. There wasn't a cloud in the sky. Her husband, Marco, who was said, we got to stop and take a picture of this because he couldn't believe it.
Wow.
So she took a picture of it, and she took a video of it, and she told me this, long after when we were writing the book, or it might have been before, but we were writing the book, this came out. She told me, during our conversations, she told me, she goes, I heard a voice in my head saying, I need you to talk to my father. And she goes, well, I would love to, but who's your father? She goes, it's the man that you talked to about the conference. I didn't know about this until, I didn't know about this until I think actually after I got to Long Island. But to make a long story short, there was a workshop presentation that a former colleague of ours was putting on. I called Patty and said, I want to come down to Long Island and see the presentation. She goes, yeah. And I asked her, I said, can you give me hotels? Or she goes, no, you can stay with me and my husband. And I wanted to make sure he was okay with that because, and he was. And it turns out we're all friends now. Me, my wife Sherry, and it's like we're family more than friends. So what happened? 9:30 at night. The workshop was over. We got to her place. She goes, I want you to get into some comfortable clothes. So I got in my pajamas. She called me into her living room, sacred space, had a fire going. And from there, the first thing that came out of her mouth was, why don't you, she got into like this real young, energetic position. She like assumed the position of a young person. And she said to me, she goes, why don't you listen to music anymore? And then I said, well, Jeannine, I don't because it reminds me of you. It was like I was talking to Jeannine at that particular moment. And from there, for that weekend, Jeannine was coming through and in very, very dramatic form, so I would believe what had happened was going on. And reminded me, she goes, you're doing a great job grieving me, but you got other categories in your life. Your father, your grandfather, you got my brothers. You need to take care of everything. Know that I'm always going to be with you. And know that I'm going to be here. But you need to embrace some different categories in your life and just not be your sole existence. The message be grieving me.
Right.
Celebrate the other categories in your life and know that we're always going to be connected.
Right.
So at that point, I began to believe in the survival of consciousness, and that jump-started my whole journey to a new level where I began to look at, Brian Weiss's work with past life regression therapy, reincarnation studies, Native American teachings of animals and nature. Every time Patty and I had conversations about how spirituality and psychology could merge, she'd throw something out at me. I'd take a look at it and say, and I'd call her back and say, Pat, I think this could work. So eventually I learned to expand my belief system to not only include science, but include other perspectives that can give us a better understanding about ourselves and the world and our relationship to the world and transcend tragedy. The book came about, I really told her, I said, we ought to write about what you did for me. People need to know this. Also, to backtrack, the other question you might have is, did I believe what was happening was true?
Right.
And I did. And let me tell you why, Stephanie. And this ironically occurred as a result of intentional prayer. I was driving the day after the conference in September, 3 workshop presenters up north to see the change of foliage, the change of season, because up in the Adirondacks in upstate New York, it's beautiful during September. And so they're having this intense conversation about spirituality. And I said to no one in particular, but it was to God, to the universe, whoever you believe your higher power to be, I want to be where they are. Which meant that I wanted to have an increased understanding of spirituality to help me get to the next stage of my journey. 7 years into my journey, my soul must have felt stuck because my soul was crying out for something that my mind and body didn't know I needed. And not only did I get, I was what they were, I got where they were, but I got something more. I got a whole different perspective that helped me learn that I could transform the relationship with my daughter by forming continued bonds with her, that the survival of consciousness is something that is real, that our loved ones can't communicate, and we can communicate with them if we so choose, and that can bring us a measure of peace, knowing that relationships are ongoing. And I tell individuals that I'm very passionate about what I believe, what Patty did for me. But you don't have to buy into that. You can believe something different.
Yep.
But for me, this is what helped me find peace.
Right.
This is what now informs my teaching. This is what informs how I look at the world. This informs my bereavement support, and certainly informs the guests that I've had on my podcast and the attitudes that I have by welcoming individuals that have all different spiritual and religious beliefs.
So your book obviously details the relationship with Pat and that journey, and then also you I'm assuming, merge that into grief and how that helped you and how it potentially can help others. That's great.
Yeah. The book is in 3 parts. One is the spiritually transformative experience that Patty facilitated that helped me find peace with my daughter's transition, how psychology and spirituality can merge to help us transcend challenge, and the importance of critical thinking for the younger generation. Also, the work that I did with Jeannine facilitated ancestral healing over my father's decision to abandon me when I was 5 years old, and my mother's decision to overprotect me. But the work that I did with Patty, and as a result of the work that I did as a result of the challenges with Jeannine's death and transition, all of that translated into making peace with my past ancestors, and particularly my mother and my father, for their decisions that they made. I got a better understanding of it, found peace with that. I always loved my mother, regardless of the decisions that she made, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't be me. I wouldn't have the moral fiber that I have. But now I've also grown to love the father who abandoned me at 5 years old as much as I love my mother, because I understand now the context and the reasons why he couldn't stay in a traditional marriage. Right.
And also that's the acceptance that we talked about earlier. You've accepted it, and then I think through that it kind of helped you heal and give you that peace. So we talked about your book, and the other thing is I know you have your own podcast, which I'm looking forward to being on next month. It's called the Teaching Journeys Podcast. So tell me a little bit about what you cover on your podcast and what sort of guests you have on.
Wow. Podcast has been in existence now since March 31st, 2023. I've had guests that have transcended their own challenges through grief. I've had life coaches. I've had authors who have shared wisdoms from their book that can help people transcend their own challenges. The mantra of the podcast is we're all students and teachers, so let's learn from each other. So when you're on my podcast, you're going to be the teacher, I'm going to be the student.
Can't wait.
That's right. And I will ask, I try to ask questions that will allow individuals platforms to shine. It's basically, it could be tell us about your challenges, tell us what you've learned through those challenges, tell us about the tools that you used, and how can those help others transcend their own challenges. So the podcast is basically about that, featuring those individuals who are willing to share what has helped them get through challenges in their own life. Not necessarily grief. It could be divorce. It could be through a variety of other challenges, other tragedies that can help my audience who are trying to transcend their own tragedies do that more effectively. Right.
All right. That's amazing. I feel like you're just doing so much to help others, and I love that. I just have a couple, one or two closing questions, just because I really want our listeners to kind of get some sage sound advice and wisdom. What do you want other grieving parents or anyone struggling with loss to know about the possibility of peace?
It's one, first of all, show yourself grace, show yourself, be kind to yourself.
Yes.
Grief is a marathon. It's certainly not a sprint. There's a lot of ups and downs. It's normative. Just celebrate the joyful moments and learn from the not so joyful moments. Those will inform who we are post-loss.
Right.
But as far as, for me, it required me to embrace perspectives that I normally would not have embraced. I would say embrace perspectives that are going to help you not only find peace, but build a foundation that is going to reflect the reality that you live in now. Whether it's scripture, whether it's religion, whether it's spiritually based practices such as yoga, sound therapy, it doesn't matter.
Right.
Find what's going to help you get to a point of acceptance and a willingness to re-engage in life.
Yep. I agree.
And realize that foundation after loss is going to be much different than the foundation you built prior to loss.
Right. And now where can my listeners find not only your book, but your podcast? Where can they learn more about you and how best to reach you? And of course, I will make sure all that is linked in the description, but just share with everyone how, if they're going through grief, how can they reach out to you if they want some help or support or guidance?
Well, my email address is bootsyandangel@gmail.com. They could reach me there. I'm also on social media. My oldest son calls me the world's oldest millennial. So I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram. My website is davidrobertsmsw.com. My contact information is listed there. You could purchase the book through Amazon in Kindle and paperback format. It's called When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. My podcast, I'm on Apple, Spotify, and 16 other channels, and I'm also on YouTube.
Okay.
So you can certainly follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. If you just Google my name, Dave Roberts, I'll come up as @DaveRoberts301. That's my YouTube channel, and that also has my podcast, and also another playlist where I've done other podcast appearances, and I feature other podcast hosts as well. So those are the best ways to get in touch with me, Stephanie.
Great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dave. Thank you for sharing your story. I know it's quite personal, but I think it's great that what you've been able to do is obviously make a horrible situation or turn it into a positive to help others. And so I'm glad you and I connected, and we have certainly something in common, that's for sure. I mean, there's so many of us who are grieving. So thank you for your time and for sharing your story. I appreciate that.
Anytime, any place, Stephanie. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to having you next month on mine.
Yeah, I can't wait. All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Hope you have a great day. Be sure to check Dave out. Like I said, I'll link everything in the description, and God bless everyone. Take care. Thanks so much for listening. Be sure to subscribe to Second Act Sessions on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you tune in. And if today's episode resonated with you, consider leaving a review. It helps more than you know and makes it easier for others to find these stories and start their own second act.